Well, we've had an interesting couple of days, but one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is your first feeling when you actually got back to the place you were in 1984. Is that right?
No, 1977.
77.
Mm.
What was there? What was it like?
It was, as I'm sitting here behind me up the river about 2 kilometres, the first outstation that was established in 1977 called Kuchindepen. And 3 of us went there on the first helicopter ride yesterday. It was Teddy Kunata and Stuart Corkatane and myself. Teddy and Stuart call one another brother, the kinship way. They're not actual brothers, but they're very close kin, and in the kinship system here they're brothers. I'm also their brother because I was adopted into Stuart's family by his mother. His father died a long time ago. So we were 3 brothers who'd lived there in 1977 who were going back, in my case, for the first time. Teddy and Stuart, I think, had been here the year before. And for the 3 of us, it was very emotional because places, I guess for all humans, but especially, I think, for Aboriginal people and for someone like myself who spent a very long time, places aren't just places, they're places associated with people. And for each of us, not long after we got out of the chopper and had flown back to bring other people down, we all cried. And we cried because the place was overgrown, and all its marking as a social space when we were there 35 or more years ago were gone. It was wild. Trees that had been there had gone. Trees that had not been there had grown. It was grassy rather than clear. There were virtually no remnants of the structures we'd built and that had taken us through a wet season. And we cried for the people who were no longer with us. Their parents died, huge numbers of relations died, young people died who had been children at Kendall. It was very emotional. It was overwhelming, but that was the first reaction. But then, you know, that day, yesterday and today have just been also extraordinary because for me it was marking a really important part of my time as a young man, a really significant year where with my sister from Adelaide, who was Andrea, who was 17 at the time and was there most of the time, 10 months or so. This was the absolute edge of the world. We had a boat that would come once a month when it hadn't broken down. There were no airstrips. We had a radio, but there was nothing. There was us. And it was this intensely social little universe of Aboriginal people and I and my sister. And it was a transformative time in my life. It's where, although there were numbers of languages being spoken, I first started getting really inside Wickwunkan.
So who else was there at the time?
Well, there were Kunata family, the Corkatane family. There was, for example, Stuart and his partner, whose country is directly opposite us, a woman from the Punkamelia family, who died, who was one of a whole set of young women who had I think it might have been scarlet fever epidemic went through, and there was a whole set of young women who had weak hearts, and she died. I went up with a fisherman on his boat to Weipa to buy stores from Weipa, and when we got back we heard that we were told she was desperately ill, and she died about an hour after I got back here, and there was no way of having her sent out, her body sent out, and we buried her a little distance from the camp. So for Stuart, this is where, you know, his long-term partner to that time is buried. There's other relations buried. There's a granny, a Cayuca granny, that we also buried there. There's other older graves. So it's an intensely personal space, and it's been sad, but ultimately just absolutely exhilarating to come back and find that whole intense social network that I was so deeply a part of, but have sort of kept on, but not in this intense way on country. It's being revitalised, and I think it really has meant a lot. And I think the other really fascinating dimension is that my eldest son Bruce, whose mother's from here, is back here in a really interesting way, continuing the work that I was doing supporting outstations in the 70s and 80s, but in a thoroughly 21st century way, which focuses on productive livelihoods on country, which aims to get people out on country, but sees that what's necessary is that people have productive things to do, not simply live on social benefits and sort of live out bush, but to actually meld traditional ways and contemporary ways. So it's been great to have him here and for him to see what the Kendall family see as also his country, which he inherits through me as his Kendall River father, from the point of view of those families. So it's been extremely special. And then tomorrow I really want to, in a sense, close the circle by bringing my non-Wick son, who has a Wick name, Marlick, after my father, who lived here, closely connected into the Corkatains, down here to also see Kendall for the first time and to learn something of this place that's so much a part now of our personal and family lives.
So it seems clearly there's a continuity, even though people have been off country.
There's enormous continuity, enormous, and so that the people we were with, Stuart and Teddy, Mavis, for example, they were talking about the differences they see in the mouth of the river and in this side on the bank of the river here from when it was what it was 35 years ago, or what it was when they were much younger and out here. So yes, they see changes, and some of those changes they attribute to the fact, quite explicitly, that people, the right people for the country, not just anybody, but the people who belong to this country and to whom this country belong, are needed for the country to be healthy from that framework. So they constantly have been talking about the country going wild, about not being looked after, about the damage to country because people are not here. So although we heard earlier on today about the wet seasons getting shorter, rain less and so forth, so they see those kind of changes, but the fundamental changes, I think, from their point of view, is that there is not this nexus between people and country, or as I like to put it, countrymen and country, which is necessary for the health of both.
So it's the kind of thing that if we were talking about climate change, bigger picture, and making country resilient, we need to keep people on country.
That's what they would say. They would say that for the country to be healthy, they need to be here. They need to find ways of being here, which is very difficult in such a remote area. And then through that, country can be properly looked after. So they might not have models or understandings of the broader climatic changes that scientists such as yourself talk about. What they have is a universalist kind of view, which is focused on particular country, and in that view the two are interrelated, so that the Aboriginal term country, the Aboriginal English term country, is not just landscape. It is people, culture, law, landscape. You can't meaningfully talk about any one of those things without talking about the other. So from their perspective, if there are these broader changes beyond their ken and beyond their control happening, what they are saying is they need to be here for the country to be able to adapt and be helped to adapt to that, to be managed for that.
Now I imagine that also reflects on health and well-being, that you can't just talk about the single person's health, that you have to talk about the health of the community and the country itself. Well, so wild country would also reflect the person might feel less healthy. Right?
Yes, well, that's what they've been saying. They're also saying, yes, the health of country depends on people being here, but they're also saying, see, that the health of people is not just, it is physical health, but they're also talking about, for example, the constant need to bring younger generations out so that this knowledge of country can be part of their way of operating. And in fact, she just told the little girl off for throwing a stone, because otherwise it might cause a storm.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I was asking about
we're still rolling anyway.
Oh, okay. Yes, well, I would say this, that health of country and health of people is viewed from a different paradigm than our Western
There's the idea of health, physical health
Yes.
and mental health
Yes.
in the West, but here you can't really talk about the health and well-being of just a person. You have to talk about the community and the country.
Well, yes, I would put it this way, that for these people, for my families here that I know so well, but for other Aboriginal people that I know in communities such as this one, you actually can't even realistically think of yourself as an individual outside of your links to family, to kin. You are who you are, not as the sort of individual that we in the West nowadays think about ourselves. You are who you are because and through your connections to others. So in very tangible ways, people's perceptions of their own well-being, to use that more general term that we use, are tied up with the, let's call it the health, the strength, the robustness and the state of their relations to others. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is too that my own experience in living out here and with supporting outstations in the Arakoon area for 8 years is there was absolutely no doubt in my mind, no, I didn't take statistics to prove it, but no doubt in my mind at the time that people living on the outstations were significantly healthier than those living in the township of Arakoon.
You mean physically as
I
well
mean
as
physically. I mean physically and
Yeah,
mentally.
true.
Less conflict, far more access to bush tucker, better social relations so that people were less stressed. They came out for that reason. So even from the Western point of view, but from their own point of view, to be on your country or near your country with kin is part of, I think, being at a profoundly deep existential level. It is being what is valued and meaningful for Aboriginal people from this kind of place. It's really being who and what you should be. And I think we saw it, we've seen it with, Stuart and Teddy and Percy and Mavis and so forth. They're really so delighted to be here. Even the weeping, when we wept at going to the other place, that's not just about loss, it's about connection. It's about, a deeply emotional connection. So these are important things for people whose lives in Arakoon have been marked by loss, a sort of a permanent loss of meaning of life in that place, at least of crucial elements of it. So this is so profoundly important, this kind of thing, and the endeavour to allow people to lead meaningful and productive lives on country in places such as Kendall, for the Kendall people, in conjunction with what education offers for, say, like young Erica, whose grandfather is a Corkatane, a brother of Stuart's, is this sort of 21st century together with tradition is really, I think, so important for people to have the capacity, the resilience, and the skills as to meet the new challenges, including those of climate change, but also to maintain what is distinctively and uniquely theirs as Aboriginal people. And I was really interested to hear Teddy talking about this morning in the conversation we were having about the importance he saw in trying to get his grandchildren go to school, because he sees that how important that is for their lives. But at the same time, he was saying, and I want to bring them down to Kendall so they know what we have here. So it's not an either or, it's a both and. So I think people have, as is their want, not explicit models of these kinds of things, but it's very easy to draw these things out of what people say, and say with passion and meaning, as constituting what they see are the things for what we might call a good life.
Last time we were here, we were talking about looking out for white clouds on the horizon. What's that about?
Here, the major dreaming, as they would call it in the territory, story, they call it here, is the women's yamstick, Yorman. And the Yorman story actually ends just behind and to my left, to the right of the lens there. For Kendall people, cloud formations, as all the Wick people that I've worked with, and I know others as well, people carefully watch the cloud formations for signs and portents of what has happened or what might happen. And the particular cloud formation where you get the sort of long, thin, almost rolling cloud, it's a phenomenon you see very much in the bottom of the Gulf, but there's manifestations, elements of it up here. That's seen as the sign of the Yorman, and it can be seen as something that's some ritual infringement, or someone, perhaps a Kendall person in distress or having died. You know, people are very worried when they see that sign, and I believe in the first trip last year, but again here, people, for example, this time have said, with some relief, there's no Yorman, there's no cloud. Everything's been going well. We've done the right things, you know. And I think it was converse last time.
Yeah, there's a strong belief as well that in the present day, even, you can do things that can affect the weather or affect storms, for example.
Young Erica, I heard just before, being told off not to throw stones in the river because that could actually lead to a storm. And I mean, there is on the track down between Aurukun and here, at the top of Love River, a story place, a dreaming site as they would call it in the territory, and au as they call it in Wicmunkin, for heavy rain, monsoonal rain, karpau, the dreaming place, the story place for the wet season, monsoonal season, and people can accidentally trip heavy rain by ritual infringement, or they might deliberately do so. Kapau, it is the name of that place. So there are all kinds of sites where people that relate to phenomena such as weather. They were recorded by anthropologists like Ursula McConnell in the 1930s. You know, ways that people can impact on natural phenomena, on social phenomena. So we've heard about the Book Owl, the child dreaming site, story place, a kind of a place which, if it's disturbed, can have impacts as great as causing men to become pregnant. But certainly, there's all sorts of stories, and in this world, in the world of traditional Aboriginal culture, forces of nature were not forces of nature. There was not this philosophical separation between nature and society. All was the creation of the same processes, not the sort of scientific processes of evolution, but the processes of creation through the ancestral heroes who laid down landscape and law and culture and so forth. And in that system, things like storms and what we might call natural accidents, illness, all kinds of things are attributable to, it's a causality which ultimately goes back to the religious and to the social field. So, you know, lightning or storm dreaming places, or fertility sites, or sites to propagate yams, or whatever it is, they're all part of a world order in which humans can intervene and seek, both for positive and negative ways, I suppose, to change.